The first proverb of chapter 29 takes up the now familiar aspect of wisdom, that it appreciates the value of correction, even if it comes in the painful form of a rebuke. Wisdom understands that all progress is gradual, whether it's gaining knowledge, honing a skill, or maturing in character. And so having to be wrong is simply part of that process. Proverbs normally contrast the wise and foolish reactions to correction, but here in verse 1, it is just a person who is impervious to reproof who is mentioned. They are often criticized for something, but remain stubborn. Their failure to listen and change over time increases their vulnerability to sudden disaster, which inevitably must come when their luck runs out. Verse 9 highlights again the danger that the wise face if they interact with fools. Chapter 26 showed the discernment required in correcting a fool, which might easily bring disgrace rather than any positive outcome. Here the disgrace is guaranteed. If the wise take the foolish to court, only foolishness will result, and that publicly. What does this mean then? There have been various proverbs which have spoken of the prudent overlooking an insult. Perhaps this is the best course of action for the wise. But if the court case cannot be avoided, the wise person is likely in for a shameful display of nonsense and abuse. The contrast between the wise and the foolish when it comes to self-control is also seen in verse 11. The fool lets his anger fly, the wise holds his own back. Being able to restrain anger is obviously a matter of critical importance for a king who cannot respond to every insult or error with instant fury. That is how Sonny is lured into an ambush in The Godfather, because he always went berserk at things, and they gave him something good to go berserk at. We saw an interesting case with David at a particular part in his life when he was starting to show more kingly qualities, having for some time been the leader of bandits. Nabal, whose name means fool, gravely insulted him, and David with his men were speeding to him to decapitate anyone who happened to have a head. It was Nabal's wife, Abigail, who intercepted him, and with a very clever speech managed to calm David down and make him see his situation and the possible outcomes from new angles, precisely the kind of counsel a king depends on. David's murderous anger, though not without cause, was not the best course of action. Abigail only momentarily saved her husband, who promptly died of a heart attack on hearing David nearly kill him, but she did save the lives of everyone else, and after a time David married her. Chapter 30 gives us the Proverbs of Agur, an unknown person who was possibly not even an Israelite. The opening section, which runs to verse 4, is quite Job-like in its thought and wording, particularly of the wisdom poem in chapter 28 and the Lord's speeches to Job. What is similar is the overwhelming enormity of the task of wisdom, how rare it is and difficult, if not actually impossible, to find. It reflects the moment when someone has learnt so much that they realize how much there is to learn, and any sense of achievement thus far is washed away in a new sense of humility, and perhaps even futility. Verses 7 to 9 are in the form of a prayer, the first and only one to occur in Proverbs. Elsewhere, we have seen the value of attitude towards circumstances, or also how additional factors can make a good situation bad or a bad situation good. Here, it is as if the sage cannot make up his mind about which situation is to be preferred, poor or rich. Both have their hazards. In the end, he decides it is better just to have enough. Before this, though, his first request is that God remove falsehood and lying from him. Does he mean false people, so that he is not drawn in with them or impacted by them? Or is he referring to the falsehood in his own character? I think that given his concern for how his material condition might affect how he honours God, it would seem in keeping with his mindset to remove the internal offence of falsehood and its outward expression in speech. These two requests, in fact, are a pretty neat summary of ethical life. Verses 15 to 16 are the opposite, however, in that they reflect a state of constant desire. There is the greed of humans, of course, but there are other things in creation which also reflect this built-in sense of endlessness. What does it mean to have in this world this aspect or reflection of the infinite? Not just an infinite, but an infinity of dissatisfaction. How do we live with these mysteries? This sense of endless openness with repetition ad infinitum and how it affects the meaning of our existence is precisely what troubles the mind of the teacher in Ecclesiastes, to which we will soon turn.